What's up guys, it's Cavalier, ATHLEAN-X.com. So should you fear the bench press? Are you in danger of being the next one to suffer a pec tear? Now look, I get it. With the videos that have been going around lately, you have probably good reason to be fearful. Matter of fact, if you haven't seen this one's going to strike fear in pretty much anybody.
Yeah, come on. Yes. Let's go. I'm here. You've got you.
Look, there's no doubt that is one of the most gruesome pec injuries I've ever seen. But are you next in line to suffer the same fate? Now, what people have done sort of ad nauseum at the moment is break that video down and try to reverse engineer what happened there as reason for what you could do to correct or prevent that from happening to you. That's not the way you look at this, guys. As a PT, I can tell you need to sort of look a little bit more globally at the biomechanics of the exercise and see where you might have some shortcomings that could potentially increase your risks a bit in terms of your performance of the exercise. So I want to make sure that I do this the right way, guys. I'm going to put the science back in strength and break the exercise down for you segment by segment and see where you might be at risk and maybe where you don't even have to be concerned at all. All right, so the first thing we should do is make sure that we're all talking about the same muscle. Because when we talk about the pecs, there's a differentiation between the pec major and the pec minor. And you can see here the pec minor has a different attachment point than the pec major does, and is the big difference of why we almost never see pec minor tears on a bench press and why we almost exclusively see pec major tears, because the pec major attaches to the arm, which is going to be able to move in space to create a greater stretch that can reach its breaking point. So speaking of that breaking point, the pec can tear in one of four different places, either in the muscle belly itself or at something called the musculotendinous junction, where the belly feeds into the tendon that then goes on to attach into the arm. Or it could be a little bit more ugly, where it's going to detach itself or avulse from the bone. And that could be either at the proximal attachment on the sternum or out here in the humerus. It's actually the humeral avulsion that we saw in that video that I showed you. Okay, so now who's most susceptible to this injury? Because that's probably what you're most concerned about. Are you next? Well, there's two major categories of people that have to worry even a little bit here. And that is, number one, you're an athlete. Particularly a rugby or football player, a boxer, or maybe a professional wrestler. Because there are stresses that can happen spontaneously in those sports that place a great eccentric overload on your pecs that can result in a tear. Ironically, almost all the tears that occur in these athletes happen in that mid-belly form. The other population of people that oftentimes will experience those tendinous pec tears or those avulsion type pec tears is a weightlifter. And if you're watching this channel, you're likely lifting some weights. However, within that category, there's one exercise that stands above all the others when it comes to creating that pec tear, and that's the bench press. And we're talking specifically about the barbell bench press. And when we look at it in relation to the dumbbell bench press, there's almost a non-existent risk in the dumbbell bench press versus the barbell bench press. The disproportionate number of pec tears that come from a barbell versus a dumbbell actually, for me, holds the key difference as to why we are at an increased risk from the exercise, and that gives you the opportunity to make some adjustments accordingly. So to understand the key differences between the variations of that same exercise, you want to understand what the pec does in the first place, and more importantly, how we can place it on stretch by going opposite of those actions. And the first thing I want you to do is take your arm out to the side and place the other hand here on your pec. Now I want you to pull your arm down to your side. That's called adduction, right? And when we do that, we can feel the pec engage and contract. We can intensify that even more by not stopping at our side, but allowing it to actually cross midline. That's called horizontal adduction, but it's still a form of adduction. The second main function of the pecs is to actually internally rotate the shoulder. So if I take my arm and I dive it down and in, take the thumb and try to point it down towards the ground, you're going to feel the fibers of the chest engage even more. The third function is to actually flex the shoulder. More of a job of the upper pecs, but still the pec major we're talking about, bringing the shoulder up into this direction. So if we wanted to see where the chest becomes most at risk, then we want to see how we place it on the greatest amount of stretch, and that is reversing those directions. So instead of going to adduction, you want to go into abduction, getting the arm out away from our body. Instead of internal rotation, we go external rotation. You can see that when we get into external rotation here, you can feel an even greater stretch on the pecs. The last thing is not shoulder flexion, but the opposite of that, which is shoulder extension, bringing the arm back behind the body. So you can see when I get into the bottom of a bench press, I'm putting myself in that maximally stretched position. Place a high load there, you're asking potentially for some trouble. Well, and not so fast. You see, because of the three motions I just talked about, there's only one that actually can be altered and is altered between the two different positions of the bench press, whether done with a barbell or a dumbbell, and therefore potentially subjecting you to a pec tear. It's not rotation. See, because rotation and altering rotation on a bench press, no matter what form you're doing, is non-negotiable. You can't change the rotation at the shoulder and still do the same effective exercise. If I do the bench press and you look at it from the side, in order to be done right, the bar has to ride over the forearm directly in line with the elbow. That is where your pressing power comes from. It's also where your safe shoulder mechanics come from. Because if I allow the bar to drift backwards into more external rotation, not only have I taken the bar away from the desired alignment over the elbow, but I've placed additional stress on the front capsule of the shoulder. We don't want that. Equally as bad, we would allow the bar to drift forward, taking us into more internal rotation. This is going to lead to a far greater likelihood that you're going to see an AC joint injury than ever having to worry about a pec tear alone, because these biomechanics are horrible for the shoulder. And again, nothing you would even consider, so it's a non-factor between the difference of the two versions of the bench press. Which leads us to the extension component. Once again, not something we even consider here. As a matter of fact, on the dumbbell bench press, you get more extension of the arm behind the body because you're not being stopped by the bar on your chest. Add to that fact that most pec tears occur in this zone right here. And that is the zone just a couple inches off of the chest, where you are nowhere near full extension at the shoulder. Again, fewer injuries on the dumbbell bench press versus the barbell bench press. Extension is not the focal point. Which brings us to abduction, that third component of chest function that I believe is the determinant factor of whether or not you're at greater risk of a pec tear when you're doing a barbell bench press. See, because if I grab a pair of dumbbells, you can see first and foremost that my hands are very close together, much more narrow than we would finish the top of a bench press. Hold on to that thought for a second because it matters. When I lower the dumbbells from there, you can see that the elbows track pretty close to the side, generally at about a 45-degree angle or so from the side, and Jesse even verifies that here with a goniometer measurement at the bottom. Now, if I grab a barbell, immediately, because I have to take a non-close grip bench press grip, I'm going to be gripping much wider at the top than I would on the dumbbells, like I said. Well, what that does, guys, is it takes that arm into greater abduction even from the start. If I hold my hands right here as if I'm holding a pair of dumbbells, you can see that grabbing a barbell takes my arm into greater abduction away from the body, from here to here. Now, from there, when we drop down, even if you're properly tucking your elbows, you're going to find in most people they don't have the flexibility to get any closer than, let's say, 60, 65, 70 degrees of abduction, which is a significant increase over the 45 degrees that you get on the dumbbell bench press. This alone adds just enough of a difference, especially for those people that are lacking the mobility and the flexibility through the pecs and the shoulder to handle the stresses, especially under high loads and the heavier loads that you would experience on a barbell bench press versus a dumbbell bench press, that can lead to that sudden pec tear that you've now become fearful of. So why are you at such risk here? Well, a couple of things are happening. Number one, the activity of the pecs is greatest during the press in this area. We know that right off of the chest, the shoulders contribute the most. Then it sort of shifts a bit more towards the chest doing the majority of the work. And then it sort of finishes off with the triceps helping you up through the lockout. If we apply the fact that we know that eccentric stresses are even greater than concentric stresses, most pec tears occur on the way down, and again, in this red zone where the pecs are contributing the most of the work and the tension through them is highest. Now, if that tension exceeds what the tendons can handle, they can snap. Add into the fact that anyone abusing anabolic steroids has generally weakened tendons. They're much more likely to give in and be able to be exceeded by the force that can be generated through the stronger pecs, especially in this risk area. So now is the recommendation that you have to stop barbell bench pressing in order to avoid a pec tear? No, not at all. As a matter of fact, again, the risk is very, very low for most people, especially those that are not abusing anabolic steroids. But I will tell you this, you should try to adapt your chest to the stresses that it's going to have to face in a barbell bench press that are unique to that variation versus dumbbell bench press. We can actually use different variations of the exercise to help our body accommodate to the stresses better. First thing we can do is a pause bench. No, not the kind done traditionally with the pause occurring at the level of the chest. I'm saying done on the eccentric when stresses of the chest are at their greatest and that area of the descent that they're at their greatest. And that is 2 to 3 inches above the chest. Now, of course, you can take this even further by incorporating the traditional pause of the chest for a double pause. Take it down on the eccentric, hold for a second in that hot zone, 2 to 3 inches above the chest, come down to the chest, hold for a second, and then explode back up to the top. Now, one of my favorite ways to do this is actually to get out of the bench press entirely and take it to the floor in a weighted push-up. And what's unique here is we're actually taking it from an open chain exercise to a closed chain exercise. And that has different kinematics that make the exercise more safe and has better stability provided to you when you perform it. So you can explore wider hand positions on the floor to get your body used to the stresses that they're going to feel in the bench press. The fact is, all of these things can help you to accommodate to the stresses so you don't have to forego the exercise just because you're trying to avoid a pec tear. All right, guys, I hope you found the video helpful. If you're looking for programs where the science is in everything we do, because as you see here, the science matters, you can find them all over at ATHLEAN-X.com. If you haven't already done so, guys, make sure you click subscribe and turn on your notifications so you never miss a new video when we put one out. And also, guys, leave your comment below. Tell me what you want to see in a future video, and I'll do my best to do that for you in the days and weeks ahead. All right, guys, see you soon.